Also with me on set is Dipti, who's got the newspapers for us today. Dipti, you're starting with that parliamentary debate on immigration. We talked about it in the news just a moment ago here in France.
And it's dominating the French papers as well, Stuart. That debate began yesterday, and it comes at a tricky time for Emmanuel Macron. We're just a few months away from important municipal elections across France. The French president had vowed to confront immigration and really make it a cornerstone of his presidency, at least the second half of his presidency. The debate is an attempt to find some equilibrium between a policy that's humane but firm. That's what Libération, the left-wing paper, says. But the paper nonetheless calls the debate a, quote, prelude to a host of measures seeking to reduce the number of asylum seekers in France and make it easier to kick out those living illegally in the country. For the cartoonist Willem, he sees Emmanuel Macron and his Republic on the Move party, En Marche, really, I guess, trampling all over those asylum seekers who are en route to France.
Let's talk about a story that's making the front page of the Times today. Here it is. Anger growing after a US diplomat's wife who's accused of killing a motorcyclist in a traffic accident. She's left the country, hasn't she?
Yeah, that's right. And it's a spat that's reached the Prime Minister's office now as well. It's not just on the front of the Times, it's also on the front of the Eye today. Prime Minister Boris Johnson is urging the US to lift immunity for a diplomat's wife. Her name is Anna Sakoulas. She's married to a US diplomat and allegedly killed a young motorcyclist, Harry Dunn, in a traffic incident back in August. She had promised at the time to fully cooperate with the investigation, but then abruptly left the UK last month, and because she has immunity, she cannot be forced to come back to face questioning, and it sparked a widespread anger in the UK and prompted pleas, notably from the victim's family, for her to come back. It's dominating the papers in the US as well. The editors of the New York Post, well, there you have their headline, says it all. Saying that the US should waive immunity for Sakoulas. After all, I quote, immunity is supposed to protect diplomats from harassment by host governments, not grant them impunity to flout local laws. The Post calling on Sakoulas's, quote, spirit of decency to come back and face justice.
And some saying now this is a real test for Boris Johnson, in fact.
Well, that's right. I mean, as if, you know, obviously Brexit wasn't a big enough test for Boris Johnson and previous prime ministers. Well, Bloomberg does have an interesting article here saying, it is a test in the sense that he's also, Boris Johnson has said he will personally appeal to Donald Trump if the US doesn't lift that immunity. We've seen the two leaders cozying up to each other. So the real test now is whether Johnson will be able to stand up to the White House. Trump's promise of a US-UK trade deal has become a cornerstone of his vow that Brexit will be a success. So he's kind of got this balancing act. On one hand, he needs the US and he has to stay in their good graces to ensure that his Brexit deal goes through. On the other hand, he does have a lot of public anger that's asking him to stand up to the US in this case.
Let's take you to Hong Kong for this next story. Leader Carrie Lam has warned that the Chinese military could step in to quell months-long pro-democracy protests there.
That's right. The protest, we know, it started out out of opposition to a now shelved extradition bill, but it's since then become a more general anti-government movement, with protesters in particular condemning the influence that China wields over Hong Kong. Lam also controversially introduced a colonial-era law making it illegal to wear masks at rallies, and that's the focus of this piece by Joshua Wong. He's one of the leaders of those Hong Kong protests. He writes in today's Independent that the anti-mask law is just a facade. It's just a pretext, he says, for Beijing to exercise, quote, unfettered executive, legislative and judicial power. Wong saying really making a plea in the Independent today, urging the international community to help safeguard Hong Kong and its people. Now, if you read the Chinese press, you'd think that two different things are actually going on, because for the Chinese press here, the China Daily, the pro-government paper, the anti-mask law is legal, reasonable and necessary to combat the, quote, vandalism and wanton violence spreading across Hong Kong, it says.
Another China story for you for our last story as well. The government has reportedly pulled all episodes of South Park, not because they're terrible, but because the US satirical cartoon show mocked China in a recent episode.
That's right. That episode was called Banned in China. It includes a plot line, basically, where a character is caught selling drugs in China and is sent to a work camp or a labor camp, kind of like the mass internment camps where numerous minority groups, including the Uyghur Muslims, are being detained right now. Beijing responded by pulling all content related to South Park from streaming and social media platforms. So South Park responded, as you would. The creators of South Park issued an official apology on Twitter, but it seems it is more like a veiled insult.
Satirical apology.
Exactly, a satirical apology. They really nailed it, saying that on Twitter that they welcome Chinese censors into our homes and hearts. They love money more than freedom and democracy. Long live the Communist Party, they said. Are we good now, China? They ask. They then cheekily revived these comparisons between President Xi Jinping and Winnie the Pooh. It's a comparison that started back in 2013 when a picture of Xi and Barack Obama was compared to the portly, pot-bellied Winnie the Pooh and the sort of suave, handsome Tigger.
It's getting worse and worse.
It's probably a lesson in how not to apologise.
Talking about diplomatic spats between with Boris Johnson. There's another one. Thank you very much. Ditty with the papers on France 24. Next half hour of the programme, a week and a half it is, almost 2 weeks in fact, since that huge fire at a chemical factory in Rouen in northern France. Our reporter James Andre, who's just back from there, is going to join me here on set. He'll tell us how local people and farmers are being affected and how they don't trust the government.